Yesterday I attended a meeting, and part of my offering to the meeting was to share a copy of my favorite meditation on working with anger. And it occurred to me that, I don't know, I find it so very, very useful that it might be a nice thing to share with others. So it comes from I think it's called a Beginner's Lamrim Outline by Venerable Karen Valham. But it's in the section on practicing patience. So Lama Tsongkhapa talks about in the practice of patience, there are three kinds, or three ways of looking at different things that we're practicing patience about. The first one is practicing patience or forbearance in confront of harm. The patience or the forbearance not to retaliate when we have perceived harm. The second kind is the patience to bear suffering, to bear difficulties and so forth. And then the third kind is the patience to practice the Dharma. So this outline takes the situations that we run into in life and really applies all three of these to help as an antidote to turn the mind from whatever our usual angry response is, but primarily to seeing the situation is outrageous, the situation is unbearable, the person who is causing it is an enemy and the most despicable being there is on the planet, and actually to turn all of those outward focused, blaming thoughts to make this into a sincere Dharma practice. So it's a great, it's one of the great methods to take whatever happens to us onto the path and use the teachings to transform our minds, which is what Dharma practice is all about, right? So, so I just wanted to go through the steps of the outline. It is not in the same order that Lama Tsongkhapa presents it, but the principles are all right there. And so the first thought is to take a difficult situation. This specifically applies to anger, but I've actually found that any kind of disturbing emotion that's raging in my mind, whether it's jealousy or fear, anything where I feel like I'm having uncomfortable feelings and I want to blame the outside world for it, this is a great thought process for. So let's start with anger, since that's where we started. So imagining the person with whom that you've identified as the enemy in the space in front of you. And, being aware of the situation. And then the first step then is to apply our minds with the idea of developing the patience or the forbearance to voluntarily accept suffering. So, how do we do that? Well, we think the Buddha's very first teaching was what? Everything that we perceive through our ignorance is in the nature of dukkha, is in the nature of difficulty. So, this is a difficult situation. Yes, I feel it. I am uncomfortable. I don't like these feelings. And yet, point one, all of cyclic existence is in the nature of dukkha. It's not like this idea that I shouldn't be having these feelings can be turned around to, well, of course I have these feelings. I'm in cyclic existence. Things are difficult. So that begins to soothe the mind that's like outraged that I'm even having these feelings. And then the very next point then, once we get that idea in our mind, is to think, well, how come I'm having uncomfortable feelings anyway? Because I planted the seeds. We know that every uncomfortable, painful feeling that arises in our minds arises on the basis of our own past negative action. And so as soon as we begin to recognize then, okay, the nature of like existence itself is to be painful or to be unsatisfactory. This is an extremely unsatisfactory and uncomfortable feeling. Where does it come from? It came from my own negative action. It came from the seed that I planted. I may not know what it was. I may, from the result, be able to guess what I might have done that made this seed arise in me. But it's one of the basic principles of cause and effect, that nothing arises without us having planted the cause for it to happen. And so then we begin to take responsibility. Okay, so instead of, why is this happening to me? The question becomes, well, why not? Okay, this is happening, and I created the causes for it. And it is the nature of cyclic existence. So then we take it the next step further. And that is developing then the forbearance to think about applying the Dharma. So, what is the next step? If we look at this as my own karmic creation, it's also arising because of my own self-cherishing thought. That's a teaching that we can apply immediately. Oh, and Venerable teaches this really clearly. Whenever I am having anger or strong emotion arise, the thought is, I am not seeing the situation clearly. I am seeing this through the lens of self-grasping, and I am seeing this through the lens of my own self-cherishing thought. So we take more responsibility for it. If it's the self-cherishing that's arising, then we begin to turn our attention to the other person. Oh, this being that I've been labeling enemy, that I'm so angry with, now I can begin to see is a very precious being. They're a sentient being with the same struggles that I have. And in fact, if I can turn my mind to be able to turn this into compassion, they are a very precious object to me, because then they're helping me to develop my bodhisattva practices of patience or forbearance in relationship to them. And so we take this opportunity to then turn this negative experience into something really positive and useful. We say, now is the time I will turn this into a Dharma practice. And this is the key for turning my mind. So if we can get to that point in the steps of our antidotal thinking, then the third step we go to is the patience for having compassion for the enemy. Patience not to retaliate in the confront of perceived harm. So we take our minds to remembering that they are under the influence of karma and delusions. We are under the influence of karma and delusions. Everybody is under the influence of karma and delusions. Everything that is arising is because we have those seeds in our minds that are making us behave in that way. And so to develop compassion for that very fact, that we're really not free, as Venerable says, that whatever it is that they're doing that is arising and making them behave in ways that seem to harm me, my own reaction is also simply a response out of the nature of my own kind of delusional view. And so to begin to develop compassion both for that person and for myself, for the situation that we're in, and for the situation that all sentient beings are in. Then we can particularly look at that person and analyze clearly, is there really harm coming from them? Are they really intending to harm me? If so, then we can apply our mind and think, well, what is causing them to want to have harm? It's not because they're happy. It's not because they're sort of jubilantly want to come after me. It's because they're suffering. And often when I get to this step, I look and say, is this person trying to harm me? The actual fact is, no, they're not. That's not their intention at all. It's my own button that got pushed. So then for sure I can hold compassion for this being that I've been falsely accusing as having some kind of vindictive intent towards me. And then finally, to begin to hold that compassion that we looked at in that step of remembering the faults of delusions and karma, and extending this feeling of love to that person, to ourselves, and then to all the beings that we have done the same reactive behavior to all the beings that we perceived as having harmed us, to begin to stretch as far as our minds and imaginations can go, to really see the situation that all of us as sentient beings are stuck in, how through our misapprehension of the nature of things, where our afflictions arise, we do actions, we harm each other, we say things that we really don't mean, or even if we do mean them, they're coming from a place that doesn't understand what nature of reality is. And so extending that love and compassion as far as we can imagine it. So if we take the time with this kind of meditation, going step by step by step, we have the capacity to really turn a situation into something that is quite fruitful for our practice. And you may have to do the same meditation over and over and over. I do. You may be looking at the same situation over and over and over, the same person over and over and over, but that actually is fine. That's the practice. But the opportunity to use this way of thinking to change our minds is part of the great, unbelievable benefit we have in having met the teachings and being able to change our lives. So try it and see what happens.